The best vehicles and the worst vehicles that consumers would buy again and absolutely would run away from. Thanks, Consumers Reports, for putting together this great compilation. We're going to take this from the top, give you the absolute most desired vehicles, the vehicles that they would buy again, customers love again and again and again, all the way down to the absolute worst, most disastrous vehicle brands that people would run from. They'd never take on another one of those brands. Okay, well, let's take this from the top. Rivian being one of the most desired. Surprisingly, as an electric vehicle manufacturer, it still has some staying power. 86% of consumers say they would certainly buy another Rivian. Now, also on that note, next in line, BMW, the Bavarian Motor Works. Yes, they actually have a pretty stout following. But not only that, there's no shock BMW's had some strong reputational issues in the past, if you go 12, 15, 20 years ago. But now, most of those problems are in the rearview mirror, and most of the problems are kind of consistent with other brands, things like carbon fouling, the odd coolant leak, but that's not something that doesn't impact almost every brand these days. With that said, there's no crazy anomalies, and BMW's reliability has gone vastly through the roof with engines like the B48, their new Turbo 4, as well as the B58, which all came around that 2018, 2019. You're going to find traditionally a very reliable BMW, and consumers are loving them to the tune of about 73%. Tesla, 72%. Now, you either love them or you don't, but people remember, you've got to think about people that would buy them again, and you're almost 3/4 of people buying or own Teslas would certainly do that again. Another brand that has a strong following, and we know they have the strongest reputation for some of the enthusiasts, and that's Porsche. And even though Porsche, we know they've struggled with some sales on vehicles like the Taycan, certainly a lot of the enthusiasts don't want those vehicles because they're electric. The 911, the Boxster, the Cayman, those vehicles are legendary, and they've been around a long time, and that infamous flat six engine has bring customers back and back again, time and time again, and 71% of customers driving Porsches would certainly do one again. Lexus, should be no surprise, 70% would buy another Lexus. Their reliability speaks for themselves. Chevrolet, surprisingly, 70%, which is a bit shocking given, especially with L87 and some of these engine issues they've had, some of the bad transmissions. But like they say, you know what, if you're one of those car brands and it's been in the family for a while, they tend to be loyalists, and Chevy's got some of the strongest loyal followers that you're going to find just about anywhere. So most would definitely buy it again. Chevrolet, not a surprise, pretty much, you know, just the type of brand that most people buy again and again. Lincoln, being a Ford product, is also 70%, just like Chevy, as is Subaru is 68%. So 2/3 of owners driving Subarus would probably buy another one. They're hard to deny. I mean, there have been some problems with their CVTs. There's been some problems with their flat fours, but a lot of those issues have been sorted out in recent years, and now they're becoming one of the most popular brands for reliability. You know, with their all-wheel drive system, they're just practical almost to a fault. So Subaru, 68% would buy again. Genesis, 68%. Genesis, you know, the off-spin, of course, of Hyundai, and a lot of people like Genesis. A lot of people ask me all the time, would I buy a Genesis? I personally would not necessarily buy a Hyundai Kia product or Genesis right now, especially given that there have been so many issues with internal combustion engines like the Theta 2. But people that drive them like them, and seems to be holding on a strong following. Ford at 67%, about 2/3 of Ford owners will repeat that business because, you know, strong following, especially the F-150, the F-Series trucks, tend to bring people over and over back. GMC, 67%. Surprisingly, because GMC and Chevy are more or less the same, but slightly fewer GMCs are going to follow. Probably vehicles like Hummer being, you know, more on the GMC side naturally. And those probably tend to have a less passionate following, if you will. And there have been some issues with those as well. So 67%. Hyundai, 67%. I already mentioned, very much like Genesis. And then we talk about Toyota. Surprisingly, Toyota has this low a following at 67% of Toyota owners would buy another one. And it's not so much about the reliability, other than the latest Tundra and their new V6 turbos are causing a lot of heartburn. But Toyotas, you know, they're great cars, they're reliable, but after a while, some people are just ready to move on to something that has a little bit more flair, a little more pizzazz. Because if there's one thing Toyota does, it's build reliable cars, but not cars that are necessarily flared and exciting to drive, other than maybe the Supra, which essentially is a BMW like the Z4. So anyway, moving on, Honda, 66%, slightly lower, surprisingly there. But, you know, Honda has been kind of sliding in terms of reliability as well. but still a pretty durable brand overall. You can't really fault Honda too much there. Cadillac at 65%. Enough said, they like their brands. And of course, Kia, Hyundai, Genesis, they're at 64%. They feel like the baby brother to Hyundai, but they're still a loyal following. And then we're getting into the lower end of the spectrum. Cars that people probably are less excited about buying. Volvos, 63%. Probably not too many people are buying Volvos, but again, more than half would still buy a Volvo. They do have some great styling, and I personally like the new detailing, and the interiors are actually nicer than some of the other European rivals. So Volvo's doing some good things in their styling, but with a turbocharger and a supercharger and a hybrid all attached to a 4-cylinder engine, it really begs to question the reliability. We know there's been problems with some of their things like the front, the ADAS or the driver assistance programs, and of course some of their, pedestrian warning programs, braking systems, not run flat tires, but tire pressure monitoring systems. There's been no shortage of issues, but those that like them tend to follow them along. Mazda, surprisingly to me, 61% of Mazda owners would probably buy it again. On the lower end of the spectrum, kind of interesting. The things that I'm hearing about Mazda, they're up and coming in terms of overall reliability. They're a great brand. The problem is their new 6-cylinder engine in, say, the CX-70, CX-90 have had a few problems, more with the programming, more the electronics and the driver aids rather than the engine itself. But also, you got to think about, they tend to rust. If you're in rust belt areas, Mazdas seem to be a little, have a little more prevalence to rust and corrosion. Acura, surprisingly, it's this low, 61%. I mean, that's an off-spin luxury brand of Honda. Surprisingly, it's not doing that well, and that probably speaks volumes because we're seeing sales down in Acura, and Acura is doing their best to try to juggle and keep alive, but, repeat customers are not that strong in Acura. And then we really go into the toilet. Now we're talking about brands like Audi at 60%. Not a surprise. You get a taste of it, you're sort of like, yeah, I'm good. I've had that taste. I'm going to go on to something more reliable. Buick, not a shocker, 59%. Let's face it, look at Buicks. They were trying to cater, they were trying to move away from kind of the gray hair buyers to more youthful buyers. They created these smaller SUVs, these smaller cars like the Regals and some of these newer refreshed versions of everything. The problem is it's largely a Chevy. It's just a rehashed, rebadged, regurgitated Chevy. So it's like you look at Buick, you pay premium money for a Chevrolet. It's really not worth it. So people get into it and they're kind of disappointed because it's really just a basic Chev or GM product. And then we get into Rams. Now, Ram buyers, only 56% would repeat a purchase of a Ram. And probably a lot of that had to do with some of their electric issues. Of course, there were some problems with TIPMs and problems like that as you go a few years back. Now, some of that's been sorted out with their new electronic systems. Their ZF 8-speed automatic transmissions have been a lot better. But of course, you look at some of their V6 Pentastars are really not inspiring. And now they've got this new twin turbo straight six. That's going to definitely veer buyers away. We talked about in a previous video how some of these new Rams they're probably bringing because of Tim Kuniskis is now promising to bring the Hemi back and bring some of the V8 naturally aspirated drivetrains back to Ram. But because currently there is only a Turbo 6 or the V6 in the lineup, a lot of customers are saying, yeah, no, I'm good. I used to love the brand, but I'm not going to repeat that because now it's only 6 bangers. And so that's a big reason why Ram lost a lot of their market share. And a lot of buyers would not buy another Ram. But if you're thinking about Ram, fret not. They're bringing back the V8 by the sounds of it, so stay tuned. Chrysler, 55%. Stellantis, no shocker, another Stellantis product in the toilet. Carlos Tavares, hey, Chrysler really only has the minivan. So if you either love it or you hate it, you buy it, you do your fix. Maybe the young ones grow up, grow out, and now you don't need a minivan anymore. Who's going to buy a Chrysler minivan? Not too many people. Nissan, 54%, not a shocker. You're almost flipping a coin whether you're going to buy another Nissan or not. Most people are kind of deciding, maybe I'll buy another one, give them another chance. But that's only 54%. Tipping the scales there by 4%. Volkswagen, same thing, 54%. Not too many people excited about Volkswagen. Hence, they've been struggling with sales. The quality's not what it used to be. You used to think a lot of the older Volkswagens and the Beetles would last a long time, almost virtually forever. But they just don't last anymore. Volkswagens aren't necessarily the products they used to be, the EA 888 engine, although getting a little better, coolant leaks, oil leaks, carbon fouling, O2 sensors, cracked intake manifolds, you name it. I mean, people just get tired of the same old song and dance and expensive repairs, especially once warranty's gone. So Volkswagen kind of losing market share. Here's one, not a big surprise. Coming from a place owning a C-Class Mercedes, I can definitely attest to the fact that only 53% are going to repeat I guess you can say repeat the mistake of buying a Mercedes-Benz. Most people, again, by 3% are going to likely buy another Mercedes. And some of those are probably just saying, look, you know what, I'll give them another try. Maybe I bought a CLA, GLA, and I'm willing to try an E-Class maybe next time. But even those people are fewer and far between. Most people are looking at the brand as they're lost their way. They've given up their V8s, their 4-liter twin turbo, or before that was a 6.2. So they used to be a brand known for their V8s, and now those are all getting yanked. And, I know there's a recent collaboration discussion between them and BMW about creating something in-house, sort of on American soil, so that they could stay afloat. But currently, Mercedes-Benz is struggling for sales. No shocker there. The brand is expensive, rising in cost, reliability is down in the toilet, and they've given up their bread and butter, the V8s. Bye-bye, Mercedes. And the worst of the worst of the worst, and it should be of no shock, another Stellantis product. Of course, we're hearing about it. They were going to put a plug-in vehicles that you could plug into a tree. They were going to create all these products around that specific brand. But a lot of people don't trust the brand anymore. The reliability, tip-ums, transmissions, leaks, problems, of course, just durability and the high prices that we've seen in the last few years. The last brand and the least likely brand that people would repeat and buy again is Jeep. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to the channel. Hope to see each and every one of you in the next one. Catch you then, everybody. Bye-bye.